Good morning, everyone, and welcome to what we're calling Session 1, Topic 2 of the Colorado Rural Housing Preservation Academy. I'm going to give folks a minute to jump on. We've got about, I think, half the anticipated participants already on the line. So hold tight for a minute, and we will be starting very shortly. Thank you. Hi, okay, everyone. So we're going to go on and get started. Adrian, if you could advance to the first slide. My name is Robin Wolf. I work with Enterprise Community Partners, and we're the hosts of the Colorado Rural Preservation Academy. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. The webinar is being recorded. You're probably asked to continue and allow for the recording. That's so that later you can see the session. We will also be sharing slide decks with you after the session is finished, probably tomorrow or the next day. Please use your chat feature. Chat feature is at the bottom of your screen. It's a little bubble. That way we can submit questions. We will have a time for Q&A at the end of the session. And that really helps us to understand what's going on. Also, if you have any problems, you can also email Adrian, who sent the invite originally. If you can't be utilizing the chat for some reason, you're only accessing by phone. After presentation, we can open up the lines for Q&A using raise hand, or you can just use the chat. So that's a way we can go on through that. All participants, like I said earlier, will receive a copy of the webinar recording and the PowerPoint slides. And this is new to us, as it is new to many of us. So please be patient if we have some technical difficulties or things take a little bit of time with pacing. Yeah, we're good, Adrian, thanks. Next slide. So the Colorado Rural Housing Preservation Academy is a series of no-cost training and peer learning sessions, which is designed to help rural housing providers acquire and preserve housing in rural Colorado. And our ultimate goal is to preserve affordable housing options for low-income rural populations throughout the state. It's brought to us by sponsorship of the Colorado Health Foundation. So we're very thankful for their participation in this and for being able to bring these sessions to all of us for free. And we will have overview and introduction to the rural rental housing and preservation, USDA rural development transfer process and development rehab, preservation financing and deal structuring, parts 1 and 2, supportive policy, a buyer-seller conference, and a session that focuses on property management. All of these right now might be brought to us virtually, but if they are not brought to us virtually, we will figure out different timing. As you know, we had a schedule. They were going to be every other month. Right now, our webinars are turning into a series of every other week. So we are currently still in what was designed for session 1, our opening session, and talking about what the landscape is in the state of Colorado and what rural housing exists currently in the state and what are opportunities for preservation. The agenda is as follows: welcome and introduction. That's where we are right now. Good morning, everyone. Looks like we've got about 38 people so far on the call. There's USDA multifamily housing programs overview that will be done by our Colorado USDA RD office. We will have a 5-minute break. I think that it helps all of us to stay engaged if we know we have a little bit of time right in the middle to refocus and to to do the things that are pulling away our attention. So we ask for your attention during the time we're talking, and then you have that break. And then after the break, we'll have an overview of the USDA 515 transfer process. This is first steps. There will be some deeper dives later. We had initially planned for a 2-day session on 515 transfers. So there will be many more topical conversations to come on this. It is a detailed process. So I welcome any of your thoughts as during and after about what deeper dives you're looking for, so that we can make sure we're tailoring our content, particularly in this time, to suit your needs. And then we will be followed with 15 minutes of kind of a moderated panel Q&A session. So that's when you'll be submitting questions via chat. So we're getting to our speakers. So our first set of speakers is the Colorado USDA RD office. Philip Dawson is the Housing Program Director, and he will be starting off this conversation. Philip has 25 years of housing experience, and his background even includes some time in West Africa in the Peace Corps. Philip graduated from DU, which is also incidentally where I got my master's, so we have that in common. And as a housing program director, he works to maximize the use of Colorado's funding allocations, which is really important for us, and helping to keep the money that we have here in the state of Colorado, which is a huge piece of what we're working on these 515 transfers. He's based at the Denver Federal Center, and generally in normal times, he's traveling throughout the state, visiting all of you and us as we do the work that we do throughout the state of Colorado. Today, he's joined by 2 members of his staff, Robert McElroy and Jody Allgood. Both are USDA multifamily loan specialists. And I hope I got your titles right, guys, but they'll be able to introduce themselves as they start their slides too. So we're really excited to have such good representation from the Colorado USDA RD office. For those of you who are not familiar with USDA housing, I think Philip will get into that, but RD stands for Rural Development, just in case. I know I'm acronym crazy a little bit, as we often are in the housing world. So it's really exciting to have all of them here. And without further ado, I will send it on over to Philip.
Hey, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me and us. And thank you especially to Robin and her team for putting this all together. It was a very nice introduction, which probably took up about half of my presentation, so I'm almost done already. No, just kidding. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about our agency in general before we get really deep into multifamily housing specifically. We like to take opportunities like this to really go through the agency because it does so much more than most people think that we can do. We always like to tell people, like, if you take a rural community anywhere in America, we can pretty much build anything in that community, from hospitals to police departments, water systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's so much more than just housing. So, you know, just as a plug for our agency, we always try to take a few minutes to really go through what we can do before we dive deep into what the topic's going to be about. So if I get the next slide, please. So the way we go through it is just talking about it like ABCs. Our first one, affordable housing, and we're going to get very deep into our multifamily housing structure here. But we also have to remember that with rural development, we have a single family housing program too, which I will get a little bit deeper into. And then of course, our B stands for business and economic development. We have a myriad of small business programs. Some of them are guaranteed, some of them are guarantees, some of them are direct loans, and some of them are grants. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we have community infrastructure, which I kind of noted on a little bit, where we can get into working with hospitals or fire departments or utilities. Can I get the next slide? So we start with affordable housing. We're going to talk a lot about multifamily housing today and in subsequent sessions. So I'm basically just going to skip over that part and just talk a little bit about our single family housing programs. Primarily what we have is what we call our 502 direct loans, which is direct loans from the government. We do all the underwriting, we do all the processing, we do all the servicing. It's our loan. We don't outsource it to anybody. There's no other bank involved. For those loans, you're looking at 0 down. You're looking at interest rates that can go as low as 1%. Right now, we're starting at 2.75%, so that's basically free money. And there's some repair projects that can go along with that if you need it. So when we're talking about working with people in the single family housing, we're making it really easy to get them right into their first home or even a second home. They can either purchase or build a house with us. And it's probably the most competitive rate that you'll ever see in any housing. With our 502 program, we also couple that a lot with what we call a self-help program, where folks will actually go out with a group of families and build their own homes. In this, they build equity. The minute they buy their house, the minute they convert and move into their house, they already have some equity based on what they've built. And it also lowers the actual purchase price for them in most cases. And it gives a real sense of ownership to the house itself. And we couple that right with the 502 program, so they're still getting that great rate and those good terms. Along with that, we also work with the 504 repair program. At this 504 program, people can get small loans or small grants to just simply do repairs on a home that they own. In Colorado, we're pretty successful with all of these programs. I do like to boast that our self-help program is one of the largest in the states as far as per capita is concerned. It's a significant part of our portfolio, and we partner with several nonprofits around the state that actually help us execute that program. But we can always get into single family housing some other time. Today, we're going to talk about a lot of programs, so I'm going to want to move on. If we could get the next slide. So our business programs are mostly for your small business owners. We do have some larger businesses that could be 500 or plus employees, but typically what we're looking at is small rural businesses that are looking for a couple different types of things. We have guaranteed loans, which are good. It's business and industry guarantee loans, or BNI. With this program, you can pretty much get a loan to do anything you need to do with your business. If you're in a rural community and you just need a startup, or if you just need to expand your business, you can get a guaranteed loan. Of course, in this sense, you're going to be working with another bank. We're not going to be providing the actual funds. We're just going to guarantee them. But what we do have that's really interesting are a couple different types of grants. We have a rural business development grant, which is, again, kind of for your startup businesses. And what we're really going to be looking at is job creation here. And almost any applicant, we want to see that somebody's creating new jobs in a rural community. And that's what's going to be really important. These are highly competitive grants, very difficult to get. So this is the kind of thing that if you're interested in, you really need to be talking to one of your loan specialists long before you expect to have the money. That's kind of similar with the next one here that we see as value-added producer grants. These grants are specifically made for ag producers, farmers, ranchers, folks that are trying to take a product and then turn it into essentially something else. So the idea is if you were going to grow cotton and turn it into t-shirts, that's what we consider value added. So you're not just growing the cotton, you're actually turning it into a product that somebody can use. So if you're interested in something like that, that's what you'd be looking for in a value-added producer grant. The last one to really talk about here is the REAP, or Rural Energy for America program, renewable energy, sorry. This program is really for people who want to look at doing something like solar energy or wind energy, putting turbines out on a farm, putting solar panels out on a chicken coop, something that's going to help offset their cost. Every time I've run the numbers on this program, it's about a 1-to-1. If you get the grant, it's going to basically subsidize your energy output to basically give you a 1-to-1 benefit. So let's go ahead and get to the next slide, please. Last thing here is community infrastructure. That's the C in the ABC. This is going to encompass pretty much everything else. So when we talk about community facilities, our community facilities is anything that's an essential community facility. So anything in a town that's essential. So we consider fire departments essential, as you can see from this picture here. We consider hospitals essential, police departments, community centers. We do a lot of grants for schools so that they can have equipment or so they can expand. These grants are going to be kind of small. They're going to be somewhere between like the $10,000 to $30,000 range typically. We don't usually go higher than $50,000, and we have a small allocation for the state. So although they can pretty much do anything that you can conceive in a small town, the actual funding is limited. So we're very strategic about how we're going to use that money. On the other side of that, we have the community facility loans, which we do loans up to 20, 30, or even $50 million for things like hospitals or larger community facilities that are going to be like a community center. We've done a couple rehabs for Habitat for Humanity, and they get a couple $1 million loans for that. Again, with all of our loans, they're going to be low interest. They're going to have a very minimal upfront cost, if any at all. Some of our loans have zero upfront, and their terms are going to be as reasonable as you can possibly imagine. One more program to quickly touch on here, and I don't want to take up too much more time just talking about all of our programs, is our water and wastewater. We call it WEP, W-E-P. And for this, we do a lot of programs with providing water across the state and across the country, potable water for people drinking water, and then the sewer as well. And a lot of times those two loans will come together. There are grants involved with that. And the grants are used to subsidize the cost to help keep the actual end users' utility bills down. So, and I could talk all day long about any one of these programs, but that's not what we're here for. We're going to be talking mostly about multifamily housing, but I did want to take a few minutes to plug the rest of the agency there. So if we can go to the next slide. One thing to remember is that, as I said before, is if you're thinking about any of these programs, it's always easy to contact us early, long before you're looking at actually needing the money. It's best to contact us as soon as you start thinking about a project. If it matches one of those things that I've talked about, here's a map of our state. As you can see, we're pretty spread out. You can drive up to our office in Delta or down in Alamosa. If that's in your area, you can walk right in the front door. Not today, but typically when we're not on lockdown, you can walk right in the front door and sit down with a loan specialist and talk to them about the project that you have in mind. So I always encourage people to make sure to contact us early and contact us often. But now we're going to move on into our multifamily housing presentation. Jody Allgood is going to start us off with just a quick overview of what our 515 program is and how we operate. So go ahead, Jody.
Good morning, everybody. How are you guys? I'm going to ask my two cohorts to jump in and save me if I forget anything that you guys think needs addressed in one of my topics, okay? First thing I'd like to tell you guys about is our multifamily housing 515, which is our direct loan program. We finance two types of apartment complexes, eligible rural areas, which I'm pretty sure you are all familiar with, our family projects, and then our elderly disabled projects, which are for anyone who is 62 years of age or older or disabled. Tenants that are eligible to live in our 515 properties, they are very low and moderate income, up to the 80% of the county's AMI. The AMI incomes are published by county and we send those out annually. They are updated annually to make sure they're keeping up with current what's going on with the current economic structure in every individual area. Loan term is typically a 30-year term, amortized over 40 to 50, and that is so that we can keep the affordable housing in all the communities where it's needed. We do not get a new allocation. We might get some, but there's not much of a new allocation for new loans for 515. So our focus is pretty much on servicing our current portfolios, and that as our portfolio is aging, we are all talking, which is what everybody's been talking about, is preserving them to keep the housing, our housing stock, our current housing stock, keeping it so that it keeps up, sorry guys, so that it keeps up with the needs of the people who are living there. So that has become a lot of our focus too, as I know that's your guys's, so that's pretty much where a lot of our servicing lies. Okay, next slide, please, Adrian. Okay, the next one that we can do is the multifamily housing 514 and 516 program, which is farm labor housing, direct loans and grants. It's financing in the forms of loans and grants. It provides affordable housing for year-round and migrant or seasonal domestic farm laborers. The housing may be constructed in urban or rural areas as long as there is a demonstrated need, which is different from our 515, which can only be constructed in rural areas. We've seen a lot of, there are farm labor properties in all of our servicing areas. We have a few in every area of the state. Right now, they're facing some challenging times too. So we're all looking at ways to make them succeed so that we can keep that housing available for the persons that it was intended for. Next slide, please. Multifamily housing rental assistance. That is the subsidy that is paid to our 515, which is our direct and our farm labor owners. The tenants pay 30% of their income for the rent, which, as we talked about before, anybody up to 80% AMI is eligible to live in these properties. The agency makes up the difference in payment to the owner so that they can just use that for operating funds. Rental assistance makes our program really appealing to the owners. So that's one of the great things about multifamily. Next slide, please. Our 538 program is our guaranteed loan program. The agency provides guarantees for private sector lenders. It's used a lot in conjunction with the tax credit loans. We're also seeing that several of our current owners are using that when they're having to rehab or transfer their properties. Their 538 is offering some competitive loans that they're all looking at as another form of financing. It can be used to finance housing for tenants that cannot afford conventional rents, but they do not need the subsidy. So it reaches the ones who are in kind of in that mid-range. The guarantee is typically 90% for for-profit entities and 97% for nonprofit entities. Next slide, please. You're up, Robert.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Robert McElroy. I'm a multifamily housing loan specialist. I work out of the Denver Federal Center in Lakewood, Colorado. I've been with the agency about 5 years, and I oversee a portfolio of about 30 properties. Excuse me, I'm a little allergied, so I'll try not to do that too many times this morning. I'm going to start with giving you kind of a state of the portfolio, a broad view of the multifamily housing portfolio here in Colorado. And it wouldn't be a proper government presentation if we didn't bombard you with some statistics here. So starting with total complexes nationally, there's 13,410 multifamily housing complexes created by RD. There's 128 here in the state of Colorado. Of those 128, our percentage between the two main types tracks pretty consistently with the national average of about 2/3 of family complexes and 1/3 elderly or disabled. Where we differ from the national average is in our composition of our portfolio in the 514 off-farm labor. Those projects, as Jody alluded to, are provided for domestic farm labor workers, whether they be full-time seasonal migrant. We have almost twice as many percentage-wise as the national average, 11%, 14 of our 128 properties in the state. On the 516 on-farm labor, we currently have none of those projects in this state. And if you're doing the math, in the left column where the national totals are, you're going to see some slight difference for the a small amount of congregate, group, mixed, and other types of housing made up in that national total. And Colorado has none of those types of multifamily housing. Next, kind of getting down further into the numbers, that 13,410 projects nationally translates to 411,510 units. In Colorado, our 128 projects translates to 3,540 revenue producing units. So on average, you'd say we probably have smaller complexes. You can infer from that percentage, those ratios. And then next, we have the rental assistance that Jody also mentioned. These are our subsidy units. They are not tied to the individual unit in the complex, obviously, but a certain number of units per complex. Nationally, we have about 69% of those revenue producing units have subsidy, 282,996. In Colorado, about 81% of our revenue producing units have subsidy. So we're thankful for that, a higher percentage of subsidy units overall to our revenue producing units. But it has some other implications. I'll get into that in a minute. Vacant units, we track again pretty consistent with the national average. So Adrian, if I could get the next slide, please. So some additional statistics. Nationally, there's 145 maturing mortgages in the next 2 years. In Colorado, we actually have no maturing mortgages over that same time period. The majority of our projects in the state, however, are beyond 20, some beyond 30 years of age. And the 20 years is most critical because many of the projects, when they were created, the capital plans that were established for them, the contributions to reserves, were set up based on a 20-year life cycle, as most capital needs assessments are. And they've now exceeded that. So those cost allocations, those projections, are no longer tethered to that project. In many cases, those contributions to reserve no longer match current needs. Every project has changes, and we've certainly seen variance in construction cost changes. So of our 128 projects in the state, 13 currently on record have conducted capital needs assessments. Of those, 8 have completed those CNAs through a rehab. That means they've done up their plan, they've outlined all their capital needs, and they've addressed the majority of them through an acquisition and rehab funding. And that's great. But as compared to the total percentage of our projects, 128, it's kind of minuscule. And the other 5, I'd venture to guess, are probably struggling, as many of the current projects without capital needs assessments are, in looking for funding sources. You know, how can they address current capital needs they know of? How can they just conduct capital plans and you know, which those capital needs assessments have a cost to them, and allocate funds to that to set down a projection of additional capital needs? They're going to require rent increases. And as an agency, we have to think about that as well, because funding a lot of those capital needs internally is very tough. In many cases, they've been doing well to keep pace with the ones they're aware of when they brought the project into service. And now that data is so far behind them, new and compounding needs have occurred. So this is some of the challenges we're facing. When we had a question earlier, it was about risk. How many of our projects are at risk? And that's a tough question, because we'd have to have probably a quantifier. I'm a statistics guy, if you can tell by all the numbers, to say what's a risk measure. You know, we have several properties that, you know, command more of our attention. It's probably the best way to answer this, and probably a disproportion of attention of agency resources. Those are also ones we'd like to focus on funding resources, making strategic decisions about their future and how to improve them, how to, you know, make them better projects for the tenants, for the community. But I don't want to give you too nebulous an answer there, but I could venture a guess, you know, we might have as much as 10% of our properties that are, you know, struggling, that need assistance, that command more of our attention. And that might be a conservative estimate. You know, if any of the other panelists want to jump in on that, they're welcome to. And then we had a second question. Of the 8 that have been done in our capital needs assessments, what was the average rehab per unit? Well, I'd have to pull up the loan documents for that, but I would guess in the neighborhood of 30 to 40,000, possibly higher per door. You know, again, Philip could probably correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's a pretty accurate estimate. But yeah, every project's going to be different, and every one of them is going to have different needs, and especially relative to the age of the project. And you know, each one of these is a case-by-case state for us. So kind of, you know, exemplifying the portfolio is a certain percentage in trouble. It all really depends. And I'm gonna address a little more of this in a couple slides. So Adrian, if I could go to the next one, please. So I do want to touch a little bit more on rental assistance and subsidy. It's a key factor for us in the state, and that 80% of our revenue producing units have it available. It's very important for us in any RD office to make 100% use of that. Well, currently this is a percentage that doesn't speak highly of us, possibly, or our program here in the state is we track about twice the rate currently of unused rental assistance. Now, part of this factors back to when I said I was going to address more later, and that we have 10% of our units in this state are farm labor. That's twice the national average. So of that 301 unused RA, which makes up about 10% of our total subsidy compared to 5% nationally, 97 are in our 514 farm labor program. So that's almost a third of our unused rental assistance unit subsidies occurring just in farm labor. And what the conclusion we can kind of draw from this is this represents some significant changing demographics in rural communities. I know this is not exclusive to Colorado. It's happening throughout the country, but particularly in Colorado, which is historically more agrarian, we've got some key factors affecting the amount of agricultural workers, the agricultural domestic farm labor workers in our projects. You know, automation, more farm work being done with less labor, urbanization. Many of our rural communities, our rural projects are in areas that once qualified would probably not currently qualified as a rural area. And that's based on a population size somewhere around, can vary around 25,000 higher and lower depending on the program. And that, along with changing incomes, on average, we're seeing domestic farm laborers making more than they did 10 and 20 years ago. These projects also represent some of our most recent construction. So they're a focus for us because being Department of Agriculture, of course, our multifamily housing and affordable housing efforts are focused on rural communities, and farm labor is certainly part of that, a key part of it for us. But these trends are something we have to respond to in the overall 515 program as well. You know, the urbanization of rural areas, many communities where younger generations are moving on, they're not staying put in the area. Elderly populations might also be dropping rural areas because there's less, what our elderly communities have often provided is a sort of retirement type affordable housing for many of these farmers who own their own farm and their own home, sold that, and may end up, didn't have any other provision for retirement, end up living possibly in one of our projects. Well, that percentage of the population is also decreasing. So lots of changes and a lot of things for our agency to kind of keep a pulse on. So Adrian, if you go to the next slide, looks like we did have another question. Thank you. This person said, I did a rehab of my 515 properties and the average per unit cost was $22,000. The rehab included all new heat, hot water. So I think they're just sharing and addressing to the other person's question. So that's actually a pretty good dollar per unit if you'd ask me. And it's great to cite the other funding source because we're going to get to that in just another slide or so. Or actually, here it is. So what are all these statistics and things mean at the end of the day? That basically for our agency and our state, our focus has to be on preservation and revitalization. It's why we partner with groups like Enterprise here today, because we've got a quality portfolio overall, and then we have some at-risk projects of assets that provide affordable housing in Colorado. And Colorado's not unique in that situation either, but with the increasing population here and increasing real estate prices, Colorado's on that leading edge of the affordable housing need. So for us as an agency, it's been important. It is going to be the focus for at least for the continued future that I can see, that we maintain that 128 projects, that those that are maybe at risk, that we address our efforts there to put them in a better level footing going forward, to give them a chance to succeed and preserve every affordable housing unit we have. Now, how do we do that? There's a number of strategies. All of these will be involved. You know, new management, transfer of ownership. You know, those are key. New blood, new focus, bringing people in who can help us. You know, turn the tide at some of our projects. You know, sometimes it really does just mean a matter of new blood, new staff, site staff sometimes can start initiative of outreach and marketing for a project that's been troubled. Cap sources that aren't typical in the community. But when you get down to all those numbers I just laid out, the real crux of it is we've got projects that need funds, projects that need rehab, projects that need capital improvements, and they're sizable. So that's primarily how we see that occurring in this state. Is in many states, that funding is going to typically come through some, often if it involves transfer of ownership, it's going to happen through an acquisition and rehab. And I think most people probably are aware, but in case you aren't, those happen quite often through portfolio deals. We've got a couple potential ones here in the state. You know, we like to see more applications, as many as we could. Those seem to be the most effective at bringing funding to our projects in need. These typically involve putting together a number of projects going after a tax credit program, such as the LIHTC. But as everyone knows, even the 4% deals are incredibly competitive. So a lot of it has to do with structuring a good portfolio. You know, is it 4 or 5 properties? How many which properties should be in that portfolio? You know, which properties have the greatest need? And trying to address that and balance those with those that we're trying to keep from becoming at risk or troubled projects. So LIHTC is probably the low-income housing tax credit, for those who are not familiar with that acronym. It's probably the main vehicle for bringing funding into our projects and probably our first view for partnerships. But, you know, we're looking to partner with any and every agency and available funding source. I appreciate the attendant's comment about using CHDO grants and loans for the property, as well as their replacement reserve funds to conduct their rehab. This is where we have to be creative. As an agency, we have to be creative in establishing relationships with other agencies and looking at each and every possible funding source, whether it be Department of Housing, DOH, Community Block Development Grants, CBDG, Department of Local Affairs, DOLA, or our own 538 and NPR programs, which those typically, I'll be honest, that we touched on briefly, I think Jody did in her presentation. Those are going to come in as funding sources. They're certainly add-on funding sources. Just want to be clear that, you know, then the comment above that, the bullet point about core funding sources most likely not being federal, that's what that's speaking to. We're not going to, I don't think we're going to see that many complete rehabs done with strictly those funding sources. They have been done. We've done at least one NPR in that respect in this state. But they're by far the smaller percentage of overall acquisition rehabs and total rehabs of projects. So they're not necessarily going to be the primary funding source for preservation, but they're going to be critical. And we're certainly here to help with those as well. But again, it's all about creating new partnerships, linking up with agencies who maybe we haven't worked with before, or establishing stronger relationships with those agencies and helping our borrowers, our partners in providing affordable housing, maintain the current Colorado portfolio of assets. So with that, Adrian, if you don't mind taking us to that last slide with our contact information. I think we're wrapping up a good bit early here. So there's another question that came in.
We got lots of questions, Robert. So.
and lots of time.
Right. So don't feel like you have to answer them all yourselves. We'll open them up to Philip and Jody as well. So I'll take that. Thank you so much, Robert, and thank you for the for giving us that context. We had a question that I think takes us a little bit back to a broadened view. It's just a question about what are the characteristics that are used to define rural versus urban. I know RD does have its own definition, but Philip, that'd be great if you could answer that for us.
Yeah. Well, it's going to change with every single program. So what I'm typing in here, if you got this in the chat bar, there's a website that I just put up, which is an eligibility map for all of our programs, because it will change for all of our programs, and then it does change year to year for some programs, and then it does change only by the 10-year census for some other programs. So I could define it for you and give you a bunch of regulations and numbers and things like that, but the easiest thing to do is just go to that website there that I put in the chat box, copy, paste that, save it, do whatever you got to do. But that's going to be the easiest way to know how we define things.
Right, and I have a question that kind of follows up on that. I know that we have some 515 properties that are in would be more suburban communities now, and what's the grandfathering policy, or how does that work in terms of preservation? Are they still able to be preserved with USDA funds?
Yes, the definition of how we, for one example, we have an MPR program. And the definition of how we can use those funds is based off of the existing loan, not based off of the geographic eligibility. So currently, any of our programs that are using to preserve our existing properties would still, in the multifamily housing program, any program that we have is set up to preserve an existing property. So it's going to be based off the fact that it's an existing property and not off a geographical location.
Okay, great. And then Steve, I'm going to try something. I'm going to try to open up the line for Steve to ask your question, because I know you have a series of questions and I'm not sure how we want to triage. So let's see if this works, guys. It's, experimenting. I'm going to allow you to talk, Steve. Okay, you should be open, your line.
I am. Thank you very much. Hey, great presentation. I just learned so much, and of course, it's always great to learn a little bit more. I do have a couple of questions, and it's just really interesting to me. I had a question early on about CNA participation, right? There's a low participation of CNAs of statewide projects, particularly given the age of these projects, all being, so many over 20 years old. So what proposals or what is USDA RD considering or proposing to address that low participation rate, or provide incentives or supports in order to improve participation in CNAs, so that we all have a better idea as owners or potential acquirers what's going to be needed in these projects?
Yeah, hi Steve, how you doing? Good to hear you. I can answer that for you. So the short answer is that a CNA is only going to be required if you're looking at some sort of change to the property. If the property is being purchased or acquired, that would be one example. If you're looking at reserving your reserve, if you're looking at resizing your reserve accounts, that would be another example of when a CNA would be required. If we have a good property that's running well, and we go out and we see a physical inspection and the property is well maintained, it might be likely that the CNA just isn't required, and there's no reason for them to participate in undergoing that process. You did mention when somebody's acquiring a property, that's almost always going to be required. So going into it, the incentive is, if the property is being bought or sold, the incentive is that it's just required. So I don't know if that answers your questions, but please follow up if it didn't.
Okay, and then the second question, if I'm still on, that I had was very interesting statistics all around the farm labor unused RA. And I'm wondering, what percentage of overall farm labor units does that actually represent? And what solutions to this is USDA RD considering to allow those properties to perform better?
Sure, I got kind of a two-part answer to maybe what was your two-part question. The first part of it is what percentage of that is. I can't tell you what percentage is it off by hand, but I can tell you that there's 3 properties in the state that make up the vast majority of those unused RAs, and those 3 properties have been struggling, and and we are seriously considering what our options are for each one of them, and they're going to be case by case. We do have a fourth property that had a significant number of unused RA, and they actually submitted a request, a waiver for allowing non-farm labor tenants to reside at the property. So they had to submit what we call a diminished needs waiver. We went through that whole process. It went reviewed. It had to go through national office. In the end, we got it approved about a month or two ago. And so now they'll be able to use that RA for non-farm labor tenants, and they'll be able to lease up people for a specific amount of time. And then that time expires and we have to reevaluate. But the idea there is to make sure that that property can remain successful for the time being. I think Robert mentioned that we do want to see a farm labor property go back to being farm labor, because that's the reason it was purchased and built. In some cases that just might not be possible, and again we'd have to look at that case by case if the property needs to be out of the portfolio because it's just doesn't meet the portfolio needs anymore. It doesn't meet the needs of the community. That we'd have to look at other options. We're not going to leave a property out there straggling. But so kind of just a quick recap, the numbers that you were looking at were really mostly 3 properties specifically, and then there was a fourth one, and one of our resolutions was to grant them a diminished needs waiver. So they're leasing up non-farm labor tenants right now.
All right. Hey, thanks.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. And I'm so happy that that worked. So now we know I can do that. Fun things we learn in webinar land. So, and then we had a question also from Corey at POA about, can unused RA for 514 properties be converted to 515? Philip, I think you've gotten into that a little bit with the waiver, but if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so if we have 514 in the state that's sitting there, 514 RA, we can convert it to 515, but again, we have to go to national office for special approval. And then the waiver option is allowing 515 tenants to reside in a 514 property. So there's the 2 separate ways of using up that RA. That's a good question, Corey. Thank you.
And then there was a question from Joe Unteed about whether or not COVID-19 relief funding will be available for USDA projects.
Hi, Joe. How you doing? The short answer to that too is that there's no plan to infuse properties with new funding. The CARES Act that came out did not include any new funding for multifamily housing properties. But we've been very lenient on a couple things. We've waived all of our fees, late fees, overage charges, things like that for the time being. We've definitely been a little bit more lenient on how we recertify tenants to make sure that the maximum amount of rental assistance is being utilized per tenant. So if a tenant has lost their income, for example, we've been a little bit more flexible on how we can recertify that tenant to make sure that we are giving them the least amount of income, counting for their tenant certification to make sure that they're maximizing the amount of rental assistance that they're receiving. And then we're also allowing properties to use their reserve accounts pretty liberally as far as any operation costs that they have for things like if they have to put staff on longer to do extra cleaning for actual cleaning supplies, if it's just extra staff time because you're trying to do your social distancing and you're keeping your staff in the office, but they got to print more paper and send out more applications, however they're doing that, we've been very lenient on the use of the reserve account. And the last thing that we're doing is we've actually doing a no cost forbearance. So any property, if they need to, we put out a lot of announcements. Some of y'all that are on the phone or on the conference right now have already done this. I think Steve actually did it, to kind of throw you under the bus there, Steve. But our properties can apply for a forbearance, and they get up to 90 days or 3 months of their payment completely just put off. So it's not going to count against them. It's not going to re-amortize their loan. So when they come back after the 90 days, it doesn't increase their payment. We're just taking those 3 payments or 2 or 1 payment if they don't only need 1 or 2 payments, and we're putting them on the back end of their loan structure. So it's a no cost forbearance. It's pretty easy to apply. It takes us probably only about 2 or 3 days to get that approved and get it into our system. So then the property is not making a payment to us. So back to Joe's original question, is there going to be any actual relief dollars? There's not any new money coming in, but we do have some tools to help people in the very immediate emergency needs. And then the kind of longer term tool that we have is the forbearance.
And then, my understanding is in the current HEROES Act proposal, there will be some rental assistance dollars for USDA RD housing as well. We've been advocating for that on Enterprise's side, the same kind of rental assistance funding that has gone to a lot of the HUD housing programs. So that's to be determined and to be passed, however. So.
Right.
Any other questions right now? I think I've gotten to all of the questions that were submitted. Oh, hold on, I've got one more from Andrew. Andrew Paredes asks, what percent from Division of Housing, what percentage of your portfolio have requested or been granted forbearance? Furthermore, have you had any stats or percentages from your owners about how many or what percentage of their renters are behind on rent?
Yeah, we don't have aggregate stats on the tenants on who's behind on rent. That'd be quite the study to try to put that together. I would say anecdotally, maybe about 20% of our properties, 20 to 40%, somewhere in that range, have expressed some concern with a handful of tenants. So that's not really accurate numbers, but I'd say no more than 30 or 40% of our properties are actually experiencing, like I said, a handful of their tenants coming in and saying that they just can't pay their rent, and they're not paying their rent as of right now. What was the other question, Robin? I'm sorry, I took myself down a bunny trail.
No, it was, you were answering it right along. Basically, is there a percentage of portfolio that has been granted forbearance?
Oh, yeah, we're significantly less than the country right now. I think that's good. I think we're only around 10 or 15% at most. We had a few last week that might have gotten us closer to like 15%. So out of the 128 properties, we're looking at probably less than 20 so far, which I think is good, and it's showing that our properties are able to maintain themselves through the crisis. It's showing that they're utilizing those extra tools that we have. It's not that the forbearance is bad, but when we have a myriad of tools, we should be using which one's going to be best for each property. In the country as a whole, if I remember correctly, we were well over 3,000 or 4,000 total properties looking at forbearance, and I could be just completely making that number up, but that's one of the last numbers I remember hearing.
Great. Are there any other questions from everyone? This has been a great and lively Q&A. So thank you for submitting your questions, and thank you, Philip, Robert, and Jody, for being flexible to answer all of the questions we've thrown at you so far this morning. Oh, Denise has a question. Denise Selders from the Division of Housing. How many portfolio acquisition rehab deals have been completed in the state of Colorado?
So in the lifetime of the program, that's a lot. In the recent years, we did a 7 property portfolio deal. So that's probably what it's hard to say, but in the last 4 or 5 years, we've done 7 in one portfolio deal. We have other type of ACK rehabs. If you kind of broaden that definition, where you have just a change in ownership and somebody comes in with a little bit of money and puts that to the table. Not too many of those, but I could say another small handful of those have come in the last 4 or 5 years. And then we have a few more sitting on the table that are coming in right now.
Awesome, great. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to take our 5-minute break at the front side of the hour instead of at the end of the hour. So from 9:55 to 10, we will restart at 10. You do want to come back for the 10 o'clock conversation, and then for the follow-up panel, Larry Anderson from his company is called Get RD Done Right, but that's a nice name. And I think that there's a lot of steps. I don't think there's a lot of steps. There are a lot of steps in the 515 transfer process, and Larry's going to help kind of demystify some of that piece. And we'll have Philip and Robert and Jody still on the line to help make sure how that's working in Colorado and have a good conversation about that as well. So 5-minute break, and we will see you all at 10. Thank you. Okay, everyone, it's 10 o'clock. So as promised, we're back on the line, ready to go. and ready to talk to you some more about USDA, RD, multifamily housing, and the transfer process. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Larry Anderson. Larry is with Get RD Done Right. And he is a former USDA official who, along with many other things, has helped create the agency's housing inspection program. And since leaving the USDA, Larry has worked with many agencies, including Enterprise, to provide technical assistance to groups that are seeking to pursue 515 transfers, among other opportunities to preserve housing throughout the country. And we're really excited to be able to bring his expertise to the state of Colorado through the Preservation Academy and talk to us a bit about this process, which is the 515 transfer process. So Larry, I am going to let you take it away.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Robin. And welcome everybody. This is my first time talking to a computer screen, so to give a presentation. So I hope I don't, my eyes don't wander too far around. But I just realized also I'm going to be in this business now 40 years come July. I signed on as a intern coming into RD's USDA program back in 1980. And I spent 31 years, left the agency as the director of preservation, and I spent a lot of time after. Unfortunately, I lasted about 2 weeks, retired, and then I went into consulting, developing, and doing advocacy work for the program. And recently I worked with Enterprise Community Partners. I'm doing consulting work for technical assistance in the Western region. Colorado is part of RD's Western region. And we do have, there's some technical assistance funding that's available to help nonprofits do preservation work. Also had a real good experience, I guess that was last year or the year before, putting on the Preservation Academy in Texas, also working with Enterprise Community Partners. There we had the advantage of actually seeing everybody in person, and we put on a series of meetings to talk about all these preservation issues. This time I'm kind of encouraged because we're going to be able to talk about all the issues, bring in the details, show the screen, show the same information, and cover the basic strategy and the knowledge that people would need to know if they wanted to take on preserving USDA's RD portfolio. And I want to start by saying it's very personal to me. I know the good that this affordable rental housing properties can provide in the communities where they're located. Folks need this housing. And there's a real threat of the properties going away. Some states have already lost up to 10% of their portfolio. I think Colorado's got a younger portfolio, but you know, the threat is there that if nobody preserves these properties, they go away, either to be lost to affordability in some of the good markets, or lost to habitability in some of the poorer markets. So it's a real mission, and I'm glad you guys are all assembled. I'm going to run you through as quickly as I can to give you an overview about how the transfer process works. As Robin had said, we're going to have a chance to hit other areas and dig into the detail as we go. But you know, feel free to ask questions. I've done this presentation a number of times, and I really look forward to being able to answer questions and increase your understanding of how this stuff works. So the screen has just flipped on the properties in the state of Colorado that are most at risk of leaving the program from mortgage maturity. And the risk on mortgage maturity is that once a property leaves the program, it's no longer eligible for RD rental assistance. So if the property leaves the program, the agency can protect the tenants with vouchers, but basically the property is no longer affordable to anybody in the community who is not in the property at the current time. And there may be more of a story to this. Philip, Jody, or Robert, if you guys want to chime in on any of these properties, feel free. And I appreciate 100% the insight that you provided during the first hour to kind of frame what the programs are about and how the portfolio is active and meaningful in the state of Colorado. But I wanted to start and just show you that these are what these properties look like. Here's what their mortgage maturity dates as estimated 2 years ago and by RD were. And so the first one is in Pioneer Valley and Flagler. I looked up Flagler. I guess it's out on the plains up towards the corner of Nebraska. It's a 12-unit elderly with no rental assistance. And one thing I've noticed, and if you look at the screen, you'll be able to see it too, is that most of these are in nonprofit ownership. And as we have done the technical assistance in the Western states, I've noticed that a lot. So most of the early properties were done with nonprofits. So you would expect those would be for some of the first reaching their 50-year loan maturity. So I've got no idea if Pioneer Valley has been paid off, whether it's still in the program. But it is owned by a nonprofit owner in Community Flagler. And just run down the list, you can see there's property in Montrose, another one in Brush, another one in Los Animas, and all those properties would leave the program before 2024, which is only 4 years from now. And as we'll probably talk about through these series of meetings, is that sometimes it does take a while to accomplish a transfer and get a property into hands of new ownership. So further on down, Otis, Haxton, Center, Alamosa, Cortez, Delta. I had to look them up so I know where they are in the state of Colorado, but these are where the first mortgage maturity properties are going to come from. And I guess in my estimation, those would be the most at risk. We'll talk about some of the other risk prospects here in just a minute. And Adrienne, next screen, please. Because one of probably, there's mortgage maturity, but another risk to the program is through prepayment. And without getting into too much detail, there's a prepayment process that the agency's been mandated to go through by statute. There's been a lot of legal action back and forth on it. But right now, where we're standing is that most properties do have the ability to prepay. There's a process you have to go through. It's usually not an exit without some responsibility on the current owner. But it's, I'd like to think about it, and I'd ask you to think about this as well, as an opportunity to bring in prepayment resources. So again, my friends at RD, I don't know anything about this. I pulled it off, except that I pulled it off a report that was printed out last week. If any of the nonprofits are interested in properties that are on the prepayment process, RD does provide information on those. We used to call it pre-track and a MINX system. And again, friends at RD, help me out on this one. I don't know if the names have changed, but you can sign up. And if you sign up for that information, you can be notified whenever there's a prepayment request being processed by RD. So this came up on the list.
This property isn't on prepayment right now. This is an error.
I'm sorry?
This property is not up for prepayment right now.
Which means they've withdrawn?
No, it was a test ran. So I think you just pulled up what was supposed to be a test. Sorry about that.
Okay.
But no, this is a new property. We're hoping that they're not going to prepay that soon.
Well, fantastic. That's good to know. And I appreciate the insight on it. And I had all sorts of questions on it because the information didn't sound right. So this is a test. And so is this actually a property in Stratton?
Yes, it's a newer farm labor property, and it's actually doing very well.
Excellent. Okay. Well, so never mind. That means that there are no prepayment requests in Colorado right now, which is a good thing. But if there were, we'll talk about how that process works here in just a couple minutes. So thanks, appreciate it. Next screen, please.
Hey, Larry, Dawn
Yeah.
has a question, and I had this question myself, so I just wanted to bring it up. On the maturing mortgages, do they have to transfer title in order to stay in the program? I think the question is, if the mortgage is maturing, what needs to be done to ensure that it maintains its sustainability within the 515 program and its rental assistance?
What has to happen is you have to have an active Section 515 loan or an active Section 514 loan or 516 grant. So that means, and it's basically, it goes back to the way the statute's written. There's actually been some legislation proposed to free the rental assistance contract from the Section 515 loan. But right now, it's important to understand that it's all about the loan. So the 515 loan, as soon as that's paid off, the project just automatically leaves the program. There's no protections for tenants. And so it's kind of a disaster when all that happens. Now, there are people who are trying to make sure that the voucher program can cover tenants that are in mortgage maturing properties. But right now, that's not part of the statute. So so the important thing is that you have to have a loan, so you can transfer title. Another person can own the property, but you do have to have some 515 loan in place. Does that help?
Great. Yeah, I think so. And we can always follow up, Dawn, with you independently, because I think I know what you're thinking. Keep on going.
Great. Yeah. And yeah, because there's a lot of information that we would have to really dig into later to answer that precisely. So what I want to talk about is how RD looks at a preservation strategy. And this is something that we had a major revitalization effort that we started about 15, 20 years ago. And the basic strategy has always been in place, but it's important to understand how the strategy works if you're thinking about working with RD. I'd like to, as I've been out for almost 10 years now, I'd ask you to think about it. If you're familiar with the HUD world, that you've got a different stovepipe to go down. There are specific rules for RD, but the basic concepts are we tried to make them basic real estate concepts as much as possible, and I think you'll see some familiarity with HUD if you have worked with that before. But the basic concepts or components of all deals is that the project is needed in its market. And I don't know how much of an issue this is going to be in Colorado. I got a feeling most of the housing needs are pretty pressing. You may have some areas of the state that are depopulating. But the first thing RD is going to do is get some assurance that and some understanding that there's a need for the property in the market. The next one is easy to say, is that post-transaction owner is eligible. But having worked now as a consultant, I can see this is a big issue a lot of times. If the RD is going to want to know that you're capable of, as an ownership entity, capable of managing the property for an extended period of time, usually it's 20, 30, or even 50 years into the future. So they want to make sure that the future owners have a good track record and have some experience. There are options for new ownership entities to come in, but just understand that that's always going to be in the back of mind of RD. Is there a need in the market, and is the ownership capable of handling their eligibility responsibilities? Next issue breaks into the basic feasibility thresholds. So you have to have eligibility, and then you get into feasibility. And we started talking about capital needs assessments a little bit earlier, and there's a whole lot of things to talk about CNAs. But one of the basic requirements is that when you do revitalization or preservation, that there's a capital needs assessment done to determine what your capital needs are, when they're needed, and what type of funding you're going to need to fund those needs. So basically, you're identifying what needs to be done right now, and then you're also identifying what needs to be over a 20-year period to make sure that your funding matches when your needs come up to be addressed. And we can talk about CNAs a lot later as well. But the other feasibility threshold that I want to jump into is that every property that goes through transfers has to have a, they call it the PAT, or that's an underwriting template completed to RD satisfaction. And basically that's to determine the feasibility of the property, and it can also be used to determine the financial tools that'll be added to the mix. The goal of the underwriting is to make sure that you have sustainable rents, because that's the only way you're going to have a sustainable property. You're making a 20-year vision into the future, and RD's always has felt the responsibility to make sure before they make that loan, or before they extend the rental assistance, or before they enter into this, that it's going to be sustainable. The CNA needs and O&M needs, your operating expenses. There's an operating cushion built into the underwriting. There's reasonable projections about vacancies. There's a need to understand whether your operating accounts are all current. Those are all thrown into the mix when you go through underwriting, which again is documented on the agency's PAT. Next screen, please. And all the and the next seller payments and increased return to owner is market based. And what this means is that there's an appraisal done, and the idea behind RD's thinking on this is that you're going to want to make sure that your market's going to sustain the property. And this is real critical, as we all know, in rural areas where rents may not be high enough to fund all the needs that are in a property. I mean, that's one of the basic issues that are always going to be different between work that's done in urban areas and rural areas, is that your rent rates might be tremendously lower in rural. I don't know if there's any more rents that are under $300 nationwide, but I know when I left, we had some rents in Missouri that were around $240 or $250 a month. And just imagine that. That's like when the candy bars were a nickel. So another term that I want to get out on for you guys to think about is CERQ, comparable rents for comparable units. That's going to be the agency's estimate of what the rents are that you can work with. And they'll be used in the underwriting formula to determine what the equity payment or seller payment is going to be, and what any increase the return to owner might be within the new structure. So CERQ is going to be based on the appraisal, the amount of equity that you can take out, or seller can take out as a payment is going to be determined by appraisal. And the thing to remember about appraisals is that the agency is involved with it. The agency has to review and approve any appraisal that comes out. And some wise advice is that you want to make sure the agency's aware of appraisals going in, and there's contact with the agency appraising staff to make sure that it's done the correct way. Also, what RD is going to do is consider the impact on tenants. And this is going to be an issue if your property does not have 100% rental assistance, and you're bringing in new debt service in a preservation transaction. So basically, the agency is going to require a preserver to limit the impact on tenants by setting aside a reserve to be used to help tenants handle any increase in rents as part of a preservation transaction. I'm working with a developer right now, a nonprofit developer, and that's can be a big issue. So it's important to, and we'll talk about tests that you figure out as we go through this, but I just want to put that out there, is that one of the agency's responsibilities is to make sure that tenants are not adversely impacted by rent increases that are part of a preservation transaction. Finally, the last piece, which is very important as far as the preservation strategy, is that this is a long-term commitment. The owners are going to be required to sign a 20 to 30-year restrictive use provision, or we call them RUPS. And in exchange for that, RD is basically going to be committing a long-term either additional funding if there's loan money involved, the additional debt deferral if debt deferral is involved, and also rental assistance. RD does not provide 20-year RA contracts, but just like HUD, those contracts are funded on an annual basis, and RD has never reneged on a renewal for rental assistance contracts ever. So basically, they have the same effect as a 20-year contract from from HUD, but you'll note that's one key difference. RD does not have a 20-year contract. They work with 1-year contracts with 1-year funding obligations, and the obligation time period is the same as HUD's. So that's your basic preservation strategy. And this is, if we were live, I'd say in person, I'd say, anybody have any questions? Because this is all big stuff. This is your 50,000 foot level view. And most times I get a couple questions. So please, if I've confused you already, let me know.
Yes, feel free to ask questions in chat or in the Q&A box at the bottom. It looks like I do have one more question that just came in. Okay, let's see. Corey has said she's confused. Sure, Corey, it is confusing. I would agree with that 100%. That's why this is actually going to be a series of discussions with RD and with Larry going on as part of the Academy. This is in no way going to get us through the entire process right now. Larry, I think maybe we can just continue with where we are, and then we'll try to see what other places we can elucidate. And Steve, then, oh, wow, now I've got a lot of questions coming in. Can an owner refinance a 515 to keep it for 20 to 30 years in the program? That question is coming from Don at the San Luis Valley Housing Coalition.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we'll cover that in just a couple minutes. And I'll also try to assure everybody we're going to cover this stuff about 3 times this morning, even within an hour. So
Right.
Hopefully this will get you started, and we can reinforce some of the stuff as we go through it.
Yeah, and then Steve has a question: is the preservation strategy presented the same if it's not an acquisition? And so I think this comes into the question. I think the question's like, if we have a nonprofit owner, they own a 515 project, their mortgage is maturing, is the process the same even if it's not an actual transfer, if it's a refi?
Yes, yeah, that's a great question, because and you'll see here in the next couple of slides, there's a number of different ways to tackle this, but I wanted to give you the basic strategy because every time RD looks at this, they're going to be going through the same process. And so these are the common elements. You want to make sure you got an eligible borrower, you want to make sure the transaction's feasible, and you want to be aware of the long-term commitment.
Great. I think we have some more clarity at this point. I think that the conversation about transfer versus refinance can be a little bit confusing, but there is, yes, the requirement to refinance in order to keep the rental assistance, which I think is really part of what we're trying to elucidate a bit as part of the Preservation Academy as a whole, to help get ahead of that game, particularly on those that are coming up with current expiration dates, because the process can be lengthy. So, okay, Larry, I think we're ready to move on. Thank you.
Adrienne, next screen, please. All right, okay, so here's the detail. This is how you look at it. And I realize the terminology is going to be a little different than, when I was at RD, I never said acquisition rehab. Didn't didn't register. We didn't think about it that way. That's basically in RD lexicon a transfer. But here I've got six pieces to go through with you on overview to access the preservation resources. And if you look at a regulation or a handbook, it's never going to give you the overview. And so what I'm going to give you right now is kind of the overview. Hang with me on this stuff because it's important to understand by entering your revitalization process from a different avenue, your resources are going to be slightly different. You're going to have different requirements. And I want to point those out so we can sort through them a little bit easier as we go through this. So the first access point is to stay or sell with the MPR. And there's all sorts of acronyms at RD, it's rural development. And MPR is going to be one of your key ones. It's called Multifamily Housing Preservation and Revitalization Demo. It's only authorized through a NOSA, which is a notice of solicitation for funding. It's a public notice that's published in the Federal Register, typically on a yearly basis. It has not been published yet this year because there's currently a 3 to 5 year backlog on available funding for the NOSA for the MPR. And so right now there's only one way to get into it. And somebody at RD might be able to help me out on this, but the last that I've heard is that the MPR NOSA is going to be out sometime this year. But what the MPR allows you is to access RD rehab funds. Typically, they've been getting about $20 to $30 million a year, and it can come in a variety of formats. You can have debt deferral of your existing debt, which is a wonderful tool. It also, RD is channeling 515 money in through the MPR. They have a 0% loan, which is basic. 515 is a 1% loan, and this would be a 0% loan. RD can provide soft loans, which require no payment, and also nonprofit grants. About the only type of funding from RD that's not available is rental assistance. That's never been available through the MPR. It's often needed in transactions, but it's not typically provided through the NOSA. So option one is to access funds from RD through the MPR. You can use it in just about any format. We used to call it simple, which is for stay-in owners. That means a stay-in owner, if they want to do the rehab, they can stay in, access the MPR funds, and move forward. We call another access point as complex, and those usually go with transfers. And as the name implies, it's a little more complex because you have to tie it to the transfer process. And then we have another access point called portfolio. And those can be for transfers or stay-in owners. And typically your transfer funding and your portfolio funding are going to be primarily debt deferral because the debt deferral allows you to rid the transaction of the current existing debt. And you would typically use tax credits or other third-party funding to do the rest of the funding process for your transaction. So number one is the MPR. Number two is the transfer process. RD's got a set of handbooks that are available on the website. And if you go to Handbook 3, Chapter 7, a lot of people call this the Chapter 7 process. And this is where you do have a sale from one entity to the next. Typically, there's a sales price that goes along with it. And it gives owners or purchasers access to third-party funding. And there's actually the only source of seller payment outside of prepayment. And you'll hear it gets complicated. And having advised people on the outside now for a number of years, I really appreciate how complex it can be, how time consuming. You know, we talked about the appraisal and the CNA and the underwriting. Those all have to be done at the time of transfer. So just again, those are going to be key features of this. but it does give you access to third-party funding. What we found, and I think this is still true, is that between 90 and 95% of transfers are done with third-party funding, typically tax credit funding. Some are at 9%, and there are a lot of transactions now being done in other states with 4% bond deals. And we'll talk about that later. That's a whole nother subject. The thing to remember about transfers is that with the low rents in rural areas, that these can often be very tight deals. The slide says pie split issues are common. And without getting too deep into it, there's a pie to be split at every transfer. The seller is going to want to receive something, a seller payment for their ownership. The developer is going to need to receive something to cover the soft costs, the legal, the construction, all the stuff that goes with putting a deal together. And the thing that RD is going to want in their pie split is they're going to want to make sure that the property is fully revitalized. So there are three people to take care of: the seller, the buyer, and the property itself. And so there's a lot of things in that. We can talk about that later, but I want to make you aware that with transfers, that's typically how ownership transfer is done, but they're typically tight deals, and there's a lot of pie splitting going on. Okay, the third one is the prepayment process. And we could spend probably a long time. I was cross-examined for 8 hours in a court case on prepayment process, and we didn't even scratch the surface. But the prepayment process, the things to remember right now is that gives you access to rental assistance, access to a new increased return to owner, and an access to incentives. And it can be done for stay-in owners, or it can be done for transfers. There's not been much guidance from the national office on this since I left, and the process is strictly regulated by statute. There's a waiting list right now for incentives, and rental assistance is finally flowing through this process again. And there's also a process to facilitate sales to nonprofits. These are very specific things. It's going to take a lot of time to dig into those if you want to dig into them. But I want to present this to you because the new Deputy Administrator for Multifamily, Nancy Ann Bodell, has stated a couple times now that she wants to be able to use the prepayment process like it was originally intended as a way to provide incentives for people to stay in the program. So it's an important process. I want to make you aware for it. So on this screen, we had three processes: MPR, which is through a NOSA; transfer, which requires RD approval and goes through Chapter 7 of Handbook 3; and the prepayment process, which goes through Handbook 3, Chapter 15. Next slide, please. Okay, now here's three ways to think about preservation a little bit differently. What's happened a lot of times is that when you have larger portfolios, you'll first have a substitution of partners before you go through an official ownership change. And what that does is give access to project control. So when you're doing a transfer, basically you're dealing with the seller and the buyer are the same people. The buyer is going to be usually another entity formed by the seller. It's a way to control the process. So if what I've seen is that when you have people sell their portfolio, typically is done first through a substitution to GPs, and then once a new GP's got control of the process, they're going to be able to structure either 4% bond transactions, 9% transactions. Sometimes they're not going to do anything to a property. Sometimes they might sell it out, but it gives you control over the portfolio. There's a substantial warning on this, is that once you come in as a GP to buy either a property or a portfolio, that RD is going to hold you accountable for that. You take over the role of the general partner And if you don't have a good plan or a good strategy or experience to be able to handle that, you could find yourself stuck with a property that wouldn't work very well. The beauty of the GP substitution is that it's fairly simple to do. RD has concurrence responsibilities, and you'll find that process laid out in Handbook 3, Chapter 5. And Chapter 5 goes through all the steps that have to be done to get that accomplished. So that's number 4. Number 5 is, and I think this is what I was answering before, is that stay in rehab. Properties can be revitalized and kept in the program without a change of ownership. When I was at RD, I liked these because that took out one of the slices of pies. You didn't have to pay a seller, and basically what you're doing is preserving the property and restructuring it. A question came up earlier about CNAs, and this is a perfect time to bring up CNAs, because CNAs are going to be required if you want to do increase the size of your reserve account or make major repairs and rehab while you're in ownership. So I want to make sure that you're aware of it, because sometimes it does get kind of overlooked when you're thinking about, usually you're thinking about purchasing one that's out there. But if you're an existing owner, or if you're become an existing owner by taking over the GP interest of a limited partnership, there's a structure within RD's regulation. It's not really clear, but it's allowed within the handbooks and the regulations about how to go in, get your CNA done, increase your reserve account, bring in additional funding, all in an effort to extend the life and the use of that property. So that's number 5. Number 6, I never included this till a couple years ago when people kept asking me, well, how do you get rental assistance? And I'll just say real quickly, rental assistance, there's a lot of issues associated with that. There was a shortage back in the sequestration year of 2013, and it was shortages, and RD was able to work with owners to overcome those shortages, and they've put the rental assistance system on a much better footing. There's better projections. There's automated obligations that are now done. So the thing I want to say is that a lot of the access to rental assistance issues have been solved. So it's actually one of the strengths of the program. We'll probably talk about later about how you ask for it. But access to RA, you can get it as a prepayment incentive. You can transfer in RA for a tenant with a LOP letter. That's really in the weeds. And you can ask your state for unused RA. A couple of years back, RD has issued an unnumbered letter that gave states authority to reissue unused rental assistance. And I imagine, Philip, we'll be talking about this to some extent. A lot of states don't have much unused RA available, but there are several states that do. This occurs typically when you have properties leaving the program, and some RAs being made available through the national office. There's a lot of advocacy work being done right now to try to increase RD's use of rental assistance for servicing purposes, but that kind of remains to be seen. So you need to talk to the state office to figure out how you can get rental assistance. Right now, the unnumbered letter says either RD can direct it to the tenant most in need, but it also provides the authority to allow a preservation project to receive rental assistance. You need to talk to the state office about how that's done. So I'm going to take a little pause right here. These are the 6 key access points to preservation resources. Again, it goes back to the theory of eligible property, financial feasibility, and long-term commitment. That's part of the preservation, the way RD looks at preservations. But these are the access points to start your preservation work. So I'm going to take a quick pause to see if any new questions have come up that on these issues.
Hey Larry, this is Philip. I just want to clarify something really quickly here.
Okay.
So with the new UL that you were referencing in regards to rental assistance, there's a formula that we have to use in order to determine how we transfer RA. We don't have discretion in moving RA from one property to another. We have to follow a very specific formula, and it will go to the tenant that has the highest rent that they're paying per their gross tenant contribution. Their gross tenant, it's the percentage of their income as their gross tenant contribution. So we can't just say we have a property over here that is looking at prepaying or looking at moving out or needs some sort of preservation assistance and say, okay, we've got extra rental assistance and that property is in need, let's transfer it over. We don't have that ability. I don't think of rental assistance as a preservation tool in that respect. It's really geared towards helping the tenant specifically. In the respect of a prepayment, it's just an incentive to try to get people to stay in there, but it's not something that's going to be offered just because somebody asked for prepayment. If somebody asked for prepayment, they'd first have to be eligible for prepayment long before we would even consider it an incentive. So it's not something that I would typically let people think was a preservation tool, because it has to be applied to the tenant with the most need first, and it's not applied to the property with the most need. So there's a big distinction there that came out with the UL that you're referencing there, and I just wanted to make sure people were clear on that.
Okay, and Philip, I appreciate that. I certainly do, but I don't agree with you. And I've talked this issue through with Nancy Ann Bodell a number of times, because if you go to the unnumbered letter, it gives you two options. You either have the tenant most in need, agree 100% with that. That's the way it's typically provided. But it also gave every state office the authority to establish a waiting list, a separate process to help preserve existing properties. So I understand it hasn't been used, and it's you would be putting yourself out for a lot of criticism if you tried to use that. But I'll just say it's there as a tool. Be happy to talk to you offline to figure out how to use it. But as far as I know, you're correct that most states are going to follow that tenant allocation. I also want to jump in real quickly on the prepayment process. We don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but I would encourage anybody who wants to receive a prepayment incentive to pursue it. This is a change. The previous deputy administrator back a number of years discouraged the use of the prepayment process. And incentives were basically ended for about 4 or 5 years after I left the agency. The last two deputy administrators, Joyce Allen and Nancy Ann Bodell, have been open to offering prepayment incentives. It's a complicated process, and I'm actually, kind of full disclosure, I'm working with for-profit clients right now to receive incentives in a couple of states, not Colorado at this point. But it is possible. The new deputy administrator is encouraging people to use that as an option. And the reason why is that it's basically the only way to get rental assistance into a property to help preserve it. So it's a tool for existing owners. It's a tool for people who want to look at it. And Philip, I respect what you said, and I understand it's complicated, and I understand it's not typical, but the door has been opened. And so it's one of those things. I don't want to dismiss it, and there's a whole lot of things to talk about it, but it's kind of changed from what it was even about a year and a half ago.
Thank you, Larry. And I do want to say we have about 5 more minutes for your presentation. So just where you know where you are. And I think what we're also kind of opening up is, again, as I said, this is the first of many conversations about 515 and 515 preservation that will be part of the Preservation Academy. So the good news is we have a year to work together as to unpack all of these things and figure them out. And then as we embark on some of these actual projects, I have a feeling we'll have a couple years or so to actually get the projects fully transferred or refinanced and into the outcomes that we're really hoping to achieve. It is a time-consuming process, but it can really be a really important way to preserve. Particularly, I think the rental assistance is a huge piece of what we want to preserve because so many vulnerable populations live in RD-funded housing.
Thank you, Robin. And yeah, so and also, if you haven't figured out by yet, I'm a cheerleader for preservation. I want this stuff to happen. There are ways to make it work. Adriana, if I could have that last screen, please. Great. Okay. Next. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. This is the advice to developers on a preservation strategy. I want to say real quickly, the first couple of years I left the agency, I spent working with a for-profit developer, and we spent a lot of time looking for portfolios we could buy the GP interests in and then run through preservation deals and make lots of money. I kind of lost interest in that after a couple of years, and it didn't. Some of it worked out really well, some of it didn't, but I wanted to share with you real quickly what I used to look at to figure out where's the place to go, who do I want to work with, and where are the deals that would make sense. And so I've got here's the best advice I can give you: look for deals that work. And I had a 4R analysis. The first one was on rents. What's the gap between current basic rents, fair market rents, and 60% tax credit rents? This was probably the best indicator of whether or not we could do anything with the property. The RD is always going to call it CERQ. They have the right to set up whatever they consider to be the comparable rents. But if you're just looking at an analysis, anytime you're talking to me about a property, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up, figure out what county it's in, pull up the FMRs, and figure out what the 60% tax credit rents are. 60% tax credit rents are probably the max rents that you're going to be able to charge in that property. So that kind of sets your ceiling no matter what. FMRs I look at because it is kind of a rough approximation for CERQ, not exact, but it's a rough approximation. What we used to say is that if there wasn't a $200 difference between current rents and tax credit rents, it was going to be tough. And if it was less than a $100 difference between tax credit rents and current rents, it was going to be just about impossible to do a 4% tax credit deal. So it's not a killer, but if you're ever looking at, if you're considering a property, you want to know whether or not it's going to work for you. A real good, the first metric you're going to want to look at is what are the rents and how do they compare with FMRs and tax credit rents. Second one is rental assistance. Oh man, that's just so important. What is the number of rental assistance and the percentages? If you go back to those first 10 properties we were looking at, you could see some were close to 100%. The first one on the list had 0 rental assistance units. And that makes a big difference because it provides you an insight about how flexible you can be with those rents. If you're closer to 100% RA, that's your golden ticket. You can be able to raise the rents to CERQ to be able to handle the costs that are going to be part of a transaction. If you're at 0 RA units, you want to know that you're in a great market, that you're going to be able to protect the tenants. And it also makes you, you've got to consider, can I get rental assistance in that property? So there's a lot of, your percentage of rental assistance makes a big difference. The next issue is RUPS, restrictive use provisions. A lot of properties have restrictions in it. Whether or not you're eligible for an prepayment prevention incentive, whether or not your description of how you've got to protect your tenants are going to be dependent on this. And so it's important to understand what the restrictive use provisions are at a property. I always ask rural development for a copy of the restrictions with a release form from the seller, because you want to know how RD views that property. What I found in some of the early consulting jobs I had is we had some properties that were restricted by restrictions that the seller didn't say anything about, and then tried to hang sales agreements on a buyer whose value was restricted by the existence of RUPS. So it's important to understand those. And finally, to finish up on the fourth R is rehab. And this was one of the first issues that came up when we started doing CNAs. We found somewhere between 20 and 30,000. I think what's being seen now is somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 of work per unit. And RD is going to require the rehab be completed as part of a preservation transaction. So usually what we would do with the rehab, before we'd spend the money on a CNA, we'd try to do a site visit to get some reference about what that potential looked like. So those are your 4 R's: rents, RA, restrictive use provisions, and rehab. You can, when you're doing your analysis, you're going to be looking at a lot more things, and I've got that on the next level: return to owner, management fee, reserve balances, current occupancy, whether or not your property and your tenants are eligible for tax credits, what the cash flow looks like, and whether or not RD feels that there's a problem with that property. And that goes into RD classification findings. So just so you know, to kind of sum this up, when I'm working with a new client, we're trying to figure out how to develop a preservation strategy. We're going to look at those 4 R's. We're going to ask RD, with the seller's permission, for some basic information that allows us to look at those issues that are in the green box. So and after we look at it, we sit down and figure out whether or not this is a property that we can pursue. Then we start talking about sales agreements and everything else that's offers, how to put an offer on the table, and what our approach is going to be to do the preservation. So there's a lot of issues. Hopefully today I've kind of given you the overview of how RD looks at these transactions, the things that are important, the eligibility, the feasibility, and the long-term commitment. There's different paths to go through, so you have different options, and I laid out 6 of those. And then the key issues that you're going to consider when you want to preserve. So there's a lot of stuff that flows from here, but this is as most I can share in 45 minutes.
No, exactly. Thank you, Larry. I want to open up for some questions. Give us a little bit of time for questions and wrap up. As Larry said, and there's a lot left. This was not ever intended to be fully how to get from point A to point Z of the transfer process. And we can always go look at that handbook, but there will be some sessions where we actually kind of go through those pieces step by step, and we will continue to engage Philip and his team on this process as well to make sure that we're all on the same page as we move forward, as we try to work on housing preservations in Colorado. I have a few questions for the panel, so I'm opening these questions up to the entire panel, not just to Larry, about rental assistance. And one question is, can you get the new RA assistance rents, or how do you go about getting new RA assistance rents at a higher level, at that closer to the FMR? And Steve's question, I think, also gets at that. Please talk a bit about those areas where FMRs are much less than max rents and how that influences or informs a preservation strategy.
All right. I'll tell you what. I'll take a shot at it the way I used to answer it, and anybody from RD, you guys can jump in. But basically, if you want to increase your rents to receive more rental assistance, you've got to get RD approval. RD has to agree with you and say it's okay. When you're in a preservation transaction like prepayment transfers, or when you're going to increase the reserve account deposits, you've got to get a CNA, so RD has some basis for increasing that amount. And I'll say this because I'm not an RD and I can say it, but your CERQ is negotiable. RD actually has the authority to go to 150% of what they consider to be CERQ and increase rents to that amount. And it's not something that they're going to do easily, and I understand that. I wouldn't, when I was at RD, we didn't want to increase it, but there are markets where, you know, you're just not going to have high enough rents in the area to allow you to cover all the expenses. So it is possible, but you got to have good documentation of it, and you need to work with RD to get RD to see it from your perspective that it needs to be increased.
Philip, do you have an answer to that question?
Yeah, the one thing to remember is that our rents are going to be project-based. As Larry said, if you have a property that needs some assistance through a CNA because the reserve deposits were low and they should be increased, the one thing to remember there is that we don't raise rents based off of negligence. So if you have a property that just wasn't cared for over time, we're going to be looking at different sources of funding on how we can apply those repairs. But if you just have a property that's running well, and just as costs increased over time, and you need to increase your rents because of that, that certainly should be something that we should be doing incrementally. Hopefully it's not going to be a big part of a deal, because if you have a property that says they have rents at $500 and the deal comes in and they want to do X, Y, and Z, and it's going to change the rents to $700, that's a bit of a shock. And we usually use a guidance that anything over $50 is going to need national office approval, and it's rare that they're going to actually approve something that's a $200 rent increase. What we want to see is those rents being increased incrementally over time. So we often go back to some of our borrowers and say to them, you haven't had a rent increase in 3 or 4 years. You really need to have one because you're just not keeping up with your own maintenance, or they're struggling to. We have a lot of our nonprofits don't have a full-time maintenance person, and it's somebody volunteering hours. And in my opinion, that's not really acceptable. You need to have someone on staff actually taking care of that. And if that's what's required, and you can show and demonstrate that, of course, the rents can be increased at that same time. And if you're full rental assistance, it won't have any impact or minimal impact on your borrowers, on your tenants, sorry, you know, depending on what they're currently paying, what their current income is. But if they're receiving rental assistance, it doesn't really change what their actual rent is.
Yep. And if I could add real quick, Philip, those are really good points. The way most of these large transactions work, the ones that use 4% bonds, because they're expensive, you got to pay a bond attorney a lot of money to get those together, is that typically those large deals are going to be done with the deferral that's part of the MPR. So that's where I kind of led with the MPR. It's a valuable tool to because what it does, it basically takes your existing debt service out of the transaction. So it's a way to bring rents down so you can add additional debt and expenses on it.
Yeah. Philip, I have one question for you from Dawn, the San Luis Valley Housing Coalition. She said, can you confirm that CNAs are not needed on projects that are in good shape and are not making changes? I thought a new UNL went out this year that said all properties older than 20 years without current CNA need one by 2022.
Yeah, I saw that question. I was trying to find the UL to which she's referring, and I'm not aware of a UL that said that everyone would need a CNA by 2022. So if somebody has that, please share it to me, and I'd have a more educated answer.
Okay, so Dawn, if you find that, or we can link to that, let us know, and we'll be able to get an answer there about the CNAs. So that might mean, I think, that you don't have to worry about a new CNA, which would be good.
Well, the short answer is, again, not, you know, it's going to be project by project, but we typically only are going to require a CNA when there's a transfer in effect or an AC rehab, or if we need to resize the reserve account. And we can find a property that just has significant defects that just needs to have it done because they haven't done it in a while. So But I would say that, again, it's case by case. We have several properties that I wouldn't say they need one right now because they are in good shape and they have been running well. If there's a UL out there that I'm unaware of, please share it with me. Larry obviously keeps up with the regulations probably about as well as I do. So if Larry knows of the UL, maybe he can share it.
Hey, Phil, thanks for the challenge on that one. Yeah, the only one I'm aware of is there was the unnumbered letter that came out about handicapped accessibility. And I think it had some requirement about to look at the transition plans again. But no, I'm not aware of any that came out and required those kind of willy-nilly. The
Right.
one other point I'll add about the CNAs real quick is that that's an eligible project expense. A lot of folks will fund the, with RD approval, will fund a CNA from the reserve account. And so you should sit down with RD, figure out if it needs to, if you got a property that needs some work, you want to sit down with RD and try to figure out the best approach to it. I'm working with a small nonprofit in another state where they want to do a CNA because they haven't done one. They're about 1 year away from mortgage maturity, and they're trying to figure out, how do I save it? Is it worth saving? What are the expenses that I have with it? So it can be very valuable, but you want to sit down with RD and figure that out.
Yeah. So yeah, this is again, just like kind of scratching the surface, I think, of all of the questions that we will have on this process going forward. And there are follow-up sessions that we will be having on this. To that point, we'll be sending out PowerPoint and the recording of this webinar to everybody who attended, and also a survey. And in that survey, if you have specific follow-up things you'd like to ask or reach out to us, that'd be great. If you're interested in, if you own an RD 515 property, or interested in selling it, or interested in preserving it and want some specific technical assistance, that's also, you can always follow up with me directly. You can follow up with us through that survey, and we'll work with you, because as Larry said, we do have a contract with RD right now to provide 515 preservation technical assistance. So we are excited about being able to do that work and help guide through this process, because it is complicated and confusing. I mean, I think one of the things is actually called complex. We learned at least 6 different numbers today: 514, 516, 515, 538, 521. And we're also going to be quizzed on what is a RUP. So don't worry, no quizzes. So anyway, thank you all for your time today, and I'm excited to continue to have these conversations with you. Thank you especially to Philip, Jody, Robert, and Larry for speaking with us today. And our next session will actually, it will be on June 3rd. It will move from Tuesday to Wednesday, and it will feature Eileen Harity from HUD as the multi-family asset development director, and also Megan Brown from CHAFA, who will talk about LIHTC. So we'll be talking about HUD properties in rural Colorado that might be at risk or need preservation and rehab, and strategies for that. And we'll also be talking about LIHTC properties that are at year 15 and what are strategies for those as well. So look forward to seeing you all in a couple weeks, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.